Barcelona was supposed to be the dream, but for Zlatan Ibrahimović, the dream had become a battle. In the summer of 2010, after just one complicated season in Spain, Zlatan knew it was time to move on. And once again, he returned to a place where he had already left his mark. Milan. But this time, it wasn't Inter. It was their greatest rivals, AC Milan. At 28 years old, Zlatan arrived at Milanello with something to prove. He wasn't the young striker who had entered Europe with Ajax. He wasn't simply the powerful talent who had conquered Italy with Inter. He was now a veteran, a superstar, and he wanted to show the world that Barcelona hadn't broken him. At Milan, Zlatan found a team hungry to return to the top, and almost immediately he became the center of everything. His strength gave Milan a new dimension. His confidence gave the team an edge, and his goals began coming again and again. But Zlatan wasn't only scoring, he was creating, assisting, fighting, leading. The man who had once been criticized for his attitude was now becoming the leader of an entire dressing room. And then came the season that changed everything. 2011. Milan were chasing the Scudetto. Every match carried pressure, every goal mattered, and Zlatan thrived under it. When the season reached its climax, Milan finally had their reward, the Scudetto. Zlatan had returned to Italy and conquered it again. Different club, different challenge, same Zlatan. But there was something different about him now. He wasn't chasing recognition anymore. He was becoming the man others followed. And his next destination would take him to France, where he would attempt to build something even bigger. Paris Saint-Germain. In Milan, Zlatan had conquered Italy again, but Zlatan Ibrahimović wasn't finished. In 2012, another challenge was waiting, Paris Saint-Germain. PSG had ambitious plans. They wanted to become one of Europe's biggest clubs, and they needed a superstar who could lead that transformation. Zlatan was the answer. At 30 years old, he arrived in Paris carrying something more than his football bag. He carried expectations. And almost immediately, he made the French league feel smaller. Goals came, assists came, trophies followed. Zlatan wasn't simply playing for PSG. He was becoming the face of a new era. His personality filled the stadium. His confidence intimidated opponents. And his goals turned him into one of the most feared strikers in Europe. Season after season, PSG became stronger, and Zlatan became more dominant. He won League One, then he won it again. And again. But there was still one trophy missing from his collection, the Champions League. Europe was where Zlatan wanted to prove himself. PSG had the ambition. Zlatan had the talent. But every season, something stood in their way. Injuries, tough opponents, and painful nights when the dream ended before the final. Yet Zlatan kept scoring. He kept breaking records, and he kept reminding everyone that he was still one of football's most extraordinary characters. Then came one unforgettable night in Paris, a long-range strike, a moment of pure Zlatan, the kind of goal that seemed impossible until he made it happen. By 2016, Zlatan had become PSG's defining superstar of the era. And when he played his final match for the club, he left with trophies, records, and a legacy. But Zlatan wasn't ready to slow down. England was calling, and the next challenge would be one of the biggest yet, Manchester United. At 34 years old, many believed Zlatan's best years were behind him. But Zlatan Ibrahimović had never been interested in what people believed. In 2016, he arrived in England. Manchester United, a new country, a new league, a new challenge. And once again, Zlatan had something to prove. The Premier League was faster, more physical, relentless. But Zlatan adapted. He scored. He created. And he delivered when Manchester United needed him most. Then came Wembley, the Community Shield. Leicester City. The match was reaching its final moments when Zlatan rose above the defense. One header, one goal, one trophy. But the season was only beginning. In the League Cup final, Manchester United faced Southampton, and once again, Zlatan became the difference. 2 goals, including a late winner. Another trophy, another reminder. Age had not taken away his ambition. Then came the moment nobody wanted to see, a serious knee injury. Zlatan's season was over. For most players, it might have been the end. For Zlatan, it was another challenge. He refused to disappear. He worked, he recovered, and he returned. But by then, another chapter was waiting. America, Hollywood, Los Angeles. And Zlatan was ready to introduce himself to an entirely new audience. The Zlatan Show was moving to America. After conquering Europe, Zlatan Ibrahimović crossed the Atlantic. In 2018, he arrived in Los Angeles. Not to disappear, not to retire, but to create another chapter. The Zlatan Show had arrived in America, and his first appearance was almost impossible to believe. His debut came against Los Angeles FC. His team was behind. The match was slipping away. Then Zlatan entered the story. From distance, he saw the goalkeeper off his line. One strike, one unbelievable moment, and suddenly Los Angeles knew exactly who Zlatan Ibrahimović was. He didn't need months to introduce himself. He needed minutes. Goals followed. Spectacular goals. Powerful goals. Goals that looked like they belonged on a highlight reel. But Zlatan wasn't simply scoring in America. He was becoming an entertainer. His confidence, his interviews, his personality, everything about him felt larger than life. And while the MLS was different from the leagues he had conquered in Europe, Zlatan treated it as another stage. He scored. He broke records. He became one of the league's biggest attractions. But beneath the Hollywood lights, one thing had never changed. Zlatan still wanted to compete, still wanted to win, still believed he belonged among the world's elite. And after 2 seasons in Los Angeles, another decision awaited. Europe was calling again. Italy, AC Milan. And this time, Zlatan wasn't returning as the young superstar who had left years earlier. He was returning as something different, a veteran, a leader, a legend. At the end of 2019, Zlatan Ibrahimović made the decision to return to Milan. In January 2020, he walked back onto the training ground. He was 38 years old, an age when most footballers were already thinking about retirement. But Zlatan wasn't finished. He was coming back to the club where he had once dominated Serie A. Only this time, everything was different. He wasn't the young superstar who had arrived in Italy years earlier. He was a veteran, a survivor, and a player who understood that his greatest weapon was no longer just his physical power. It was his experience. When he stepped onto the training ground, younger players surrounded him. They had grown up watching Zlatan. Now they were sharing the same dressing room, and Zlatan demanded more from them. More intensity, more confidence, more belief. Milan were rebuilding, and Zlatan became one of the voices leading that transformation. He scored important goals. He created chances. He pushed his teammates. And even at an age when every match demanded more from his body, he continued to play as if time didn't matter. Milan were no longer simply trying to remember their past. They were beginning to believe in their future. And then came the 2021-22 season. Zlatan was 40 years old. The youngest players in the squad were almost half his age. Yet he remained one of the emotional leaders of the team. Every match carried more weight. Every sprint hurt a little more. Every recovery took a little longer. But the dream remained. On the final day of the 2021-22 Serie A season, Milan needed one last victory. They delivered. And after years of rebuilding, AC Milan were champions of Italy again. The Scudetto was back in Milan, and Zlatan stood among the champions. At 40 years old, it was another reminder that his career had never followed the normal rules. But football eventually asked every player the same question. How long can the body continue? Zlatan's body had carried him through decades of football, through injuries, through surgeries, through pain. And now the years were finally beginning to catch up. The player who once seemed almost impossible to break was becoming human. His appearances became fewer. The injuries became harder to ignore. And the question was no longer whether Zlatan could continue forever. It was whether he was ready to stop. Then came June 2023. San Siro was waiting. This time there was no comeback, no new club, no next chapter to announce. Zlatan walked onto the pitch knowing that this was goodbye. The stadium that had witnessed his goals, his victories, his arrogance, his confidence, and his transformation now stood in silence and applause. He looked around, 41 years old, more than 2 decades of professional football behind him, league titles, goals, trophies, injuries, controversies, comebacks, and moments that seemed impossible. The boy from Rosengård had traveled farther than anyone could have imagined, and now the journey was ending where another chapter had once begun, in Milan. Zlatan Ibrahimović was no longer simply a footballer. He had become a story about talent, but also about belief, about refusing to accept the limits other people placed on him, and about continuing to rise every time the world expected him to fall. The king had left the pitch, but the legend was just beginning. So, what remains when the stadium lights finally go dark? What remains when the boots are no longer needed? For Zlatan Ibrahimović, the answer is simple: a legacy. From the streets of Rosengård to the biggest stadiums in Europe, from Ajax to Italy, from Barcelona to Paris, from Manchester to Los Angeles, and finally back to Milan. He played for some of the greatest clubs in the world. He won league titles in multiple countries. He scored hundreds of goals. He created moments that seemed impossible. But statistics can only explain part of Zlatan's story. Because Zlatan was never only about the numbers. He was about personality, confidence, defiance, and the refusal to accept that something was impossible. There were injuries, there were defeats, there were moments when people questioned whether he was finished, and every time he came back. At 40 years old, he helped Milan become champions of Italy again. At 41, he finally walked away from the game, not because the story had become small, but because he had decided it was time to close the book. He left football with something very few players ever achieve: the ability to make people remember exactly where they were when they watched him. The goals, the celebrations, the confidence, the impossible moments, and that unmistakable voice. Zlatan once arrived as a boy who wanted to prove everyone wrong. He left as one of football's most unforgettable characters. Maybe that is the real legacy: not being perfect, not winning everything, but becoming impossible to ignore. Because some players play the game, some players win trophies, some players become legends, but very few become a story that people continue telling long after the final whistle. Zlatan Ibrahimović became that story. And perhaps the greatest thing about his journey is that he never stopped believing in the boy from Rosengård. The king left the pitch, but the story stays forever.